addiction, what we often see is somebody who's continuing to do a behavior or continue to use a drug, even though it has extreme negative consequences in their life. That would be, I think, a sort of a layperson's idea of what addiction is. That's what it looks like. That's what we see. We see somebody who continues to do something, even though bad things are continuing to happen. And if you're not have addiction, you can't understand that. We can't understand why somebody who's just lost their job and their family might continue to use drugs. In terms of clinically, addiction has a number of different important criteria that have to be met in order for somebody to develop an addiction. So one of those criteria has to do with having to use more and more of a substance in order to get the same effect. So for example, we have lots of people who might use alcohol once a week or even every night have a glass of wine. If they don't, all because they're using alcohol doesn't mean that they have an addiction to alcohol. Addiction has to be, somebody has shown that they have to use more and more. That can be a psychological thing, or that can be a chemical thing. There are some drugs that are chemically dependent. You get dependent on them. There are some that are psychologically dependent. Also, if you have an addiction, that means that it's interfering with your daily life. If you're somebody who goes home and has a glass of wine every day, it's not interfering with your daily life. Unless you are having so much wine every night that you can't get up in the morning, you can't go to work, and it's interfering with life or relationships, then it's more in the realm of a problem behavior. I think that's an interesting term, and lots of people think that who have problems with eating feel like they may have an addiction, and that is probably in some ways true. It's very similar to an addiction. What's not similar, though, is that unlike drugs, you don't have to have drugs every day, whereas for food, you have to have some level of food every day, and that's what makes it different from an addiction. Just like drugs, though, and alcohol and other sorts of addictions, eating sometimes can be fueled by negative emotions and other things, and so it tends to feel similar to people who have a problem with eating. When people eat food, there are some positive chemicals that can be released, especially if we form an association between positive mood states and food. And this is very common in a place like in our culture in Bermuda, where we tend to celebrate positive emotions, positive events, family events with food. And so in that case, when we eat something good, it tends to bring on positive feelings. And it does tend to release endorphins and other chemicals that simulate sort of good feelings. And those may be the similar chemicals that are released during drug use as well, which is why, again, some people tend to associate it with an addiction. When one becomes obese, there is a number of medical side effects, which of course I can speak to in somewhat, but I know much more about the psychological effects of becoming obese, which I'll speak to. When one becomes obese, it is an insult to one's self-esteem for some people, not for everybody. It also has a ramification. Some people experience stigma. Some people experience changes in how they're perceived in the community and in their environments. And all of these things can contribute to mental health states. It can make somebody depressed or anxious. Also, there might be the medical conditions that go along with becoming obese, such as high blood pressure, heart disease, and various other things can also contribute to a psychological problem, such as depression.